for today. With me is a big panel of state legislators and policy experts who are really going to help us better understand how the ongoing pandemic and the budget process that's still ongoing play into one of the biggest issues around. This is housing, after all, right? Such a big thing, affects millions of New Yorkers, obviously. But first, before we jump into it, I want to thank our great sponsor, AARP New York, for helping us put this together. There's two big questions as I see it. There's a huge amount of short-term need because of the pandemic and all of its various side effects. And then, of course, even before COVID became a thing, affordable housing was very much one of the hottest issues in the state and very complicated. So let's try to unpack it with these great lawmakers and policy experts that we got here. In answering those questions, we'll touch on all sorts of stuff: homeowners, assistance for homeowners, tenants, gentrification, accessory dwelling units, the rent moratorium or eviction moratorium, sorry. So let's introduce our panelists. Please just give a wave. We got State Senator Peter Harcum of Northern Westchester. We got State Senate Housing Committee Chair Brian Kavanaugh, who represents parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn. Assemblymember Harvey Epstein of Manhattan. Assemblymember Michael Fitzpatrick of Long Island. Assemblymember Damon Meeks of Rochester. Assemblymember Jonathan Rivera of Buffalo. And then batting cleanup is Kristen McManus, Associate State Director at AARP New York. Thank you all so much for joining us. Let's jump right into it. We're just coming hopefully towards the home stretch of this pandemic. It's affected people in so many different ways. I wanted to ask you, Assemblymember Meeks, maybe you could just tell us a little bit, given your own personal experience right after you got into office, just how much need is there in your district? What do people really need from lawmakers?
People truly need help at this time, and we recognize that in dealing with the eviction moratorium. I'm really grateful to all the members of the Assembly as well as the Senate that saw it fitting to move forward and push legislation to ensure that we kept people in their homes. We were experiencing actual evictions in which there was legislation out there that we thought would protect tenants, but the reality of it was to the discretion of the different judges. So some judges in Downstate recognized, okay, this is how the legislation read, and it was a total different practice in Rochester, in which we seen people forcefully evicted by police officers. And we really took the position that, housing is not a policing issue, and it shouldn't call for police officers to come and put people out on the streets in the middle of a pandemic. So we let our voices be heard. I was there witnessing this type of situation, decided to share it with the masses via social media, and ended up arrested in the back of a police car for about 4 hours, handcuffed. So, that was a tough situation, but it was an even tougher situation for a mother and her 3 children to be put out on the streets of Rochester in 18-degree weather. So, I'm really thankful to all my colleagues that recognize the injustice of putting people on the streets, in particular during a pandemic, and moving forward in a speedy manner and pushing legislation to protect people and keep them in their homes at this time. So that was a priority for us all, and recognizing that it was an emergency, and we worked together and we were able to get things done. And that's something that we're committed to, and we will continue to push as it relates to housing issues and many other issues facing New Yorkers. Thank you.
Now, there's no such thing as a normal year in Albany or in state politics, but what happened when you got arrested really seemed to spark some action, or at least add a lot of momentum to these efforts that State Senator Kavanaugh was really crucial to passing a bill in December when the legislature normally never meets to implement a rent moratorium for people in certain circumstances until May 1st, I believe. Senator, can you tell us where things stand right now in keeping people in their homes?
Yeah, so we've been committed from the beginning to make sure that people are not losing their homes because of the financial hardship that's come with the pandemic. So we had a moratorium, basically a complete moratorium in place that was done by the governor and by the courts from March of last year through the end of September. It was a very strong moratorium. that basically prevented any evictions from going forward. It had been weakened at the end of September, and as some of our Meeks noted, we started seeing evictions earlier upstate than downstate. They started in October in places like Rochester. The first eviction we're aware of in New York that seemed to be somebody who might be experiencing a hardship was late November. But we thought it was very important to put in a moratorium in place that is done by the legislature and is very strong. And just for briefly, what the current state of affairs is if you are experiencing a hardship, a financial hardship because of COVID, or if it would be a hardship to you because of health reasons to move right now, you can sign a simple form. You basically check the box that indicates what kind of hardship you are. You identify yourself and you sign the form, and you provide that to your landlord if you have not been brought to court yet. And if you provide that form, it means your landlord cannot even initiate a case against you. If you have a case and you provide it to the court, that it will basically suspend that proceeding. The only exception is for tenants who might be doing things that are causing danger to their neighbors in the building or other things. There's a limited exception, but it is the strongest moratorium we're aware of that any legislature in America has put in effect. The end date for that current system is May 1st. That was the date that was negotiated and decided upon in late December. But this is a public health measure, and so I think that it's important that the legislature continue to assess whether that moratorium needs to be in place longer. Based on what I know now, in the middle of March, I think we do need to extend it past May 1st. But that's something the legislature and my colleagues and I are going to have to discuss.
So I want to kind of throw it out there for our audience. You can ask questions. Just go to the Q&A probably at the bottom of your screen to submit them, and we'll try to get them to our panelists as soon as possible. So now that we know kind of a little bit about where the need is and where we stand with the eviction moratorium, I kind of want to just throw it out there to the panel. You know, we're in the middle of state budget negotiations. What is an issue that you're really focusing on for your constituents?
I'd be happy to jump in, but I want to give my colleagues an opportunity.
You know, from a Long Island perspective, you know, the number one budget item usually out here is aid to education for our school districts. That seems to be a very common thread among suburban legislators. And, you know, from a housing perspective, since we are talking about housing, you know, there will be, I think Brian is right. I think we will move the goalposts again from May 1st further out. And the reason we have to do that probably is the economy is not open yet. I think the best thing we can do for housing, Zach, is to start reopening this economy as quickly as possible. We are fast approaching herd immunity now. The rate of immunization is up. Yeah, we still have some you know, COVID out there, but the faster people get vaccinated, the faster we can open up the economy. Some other states are moving more swiftly than we are, and they're doing, I think, a good job with it. I think, in my opinion, we have been overly harsh. I thought, you know, a year ago, it's a little over a year ago, we all had our meetings with Dr. Zucker to brief us on what was coming. And you know, I remember during our briefing, he was very, very blunt. He said, a lot of people are going to die from this pandemic because of this virus. We're a lot smarter 12 months later than we were when we first started. And the best thing we can do for our seniors, for housing, for a whole host of issues is to get this economy open as quickly as possible. Because I continue to believe we have not yet felt the full effect of this pandemic, and we will not get a complete grasp of this until we get everybody vaccinated, and then we see what we're looking at when all the dust settles. So we know we're going to be doing a lot more business via Zoom. We know companies are releasing space in buildings for a smaller amount of square footage than they had before because they don't need it. We've lost a lot of people due to COVID, and the fact that the city has a particular problem because we have a crime problem in the city, and people will not come back to the city to live and work in greater numbers unless they feel comfortable. So this is a problem that needs to be addressed, I think, very quickly. But I think the governor, who in the beginning I think did a very good job of taking charge and helping us all get through this. But I just don't understand why restaurants in New York City are not open, and why they can't open at 30 to 50%. We've lost some wonderful names that we all know and love in the restaurant business. But the people who are hardest hit, especially in the Black and brown communities, are people who work in the hospitality and restaurant industries. And we need to open up so that they can get back to work, so that they can get back to paying their rent. I think when we, the moratorium or the eviction moratorium is a very strong one. But I can tell you stories that come into my office from people who own one or two single family homes are renting them out. And you have people who are taking advantage of this, who can afford to pay rent and are gaming the system. And I don't, it's probably not a lot, but it's enough where I think we should have given judges some discretion so that games like this are not encouraged. And I think the current system does encourage people to game the system.
Zach, can I just jump in here for a second?
Please.
Because, while I respect my colleague's position, I actually have a really different perspective. As someone who actually does live in New York City, who lives in lower Manhattan, who, I actually feel like the allegations or claims about crime rising is just factually not correct. We've seen crime rates go down. There's some particular crimes that are going up, but the overall crime rate in New York City is going down. I think we have some structural problems that exist. And I think it's really important to talk about rent, because what we've seen is 1.3 million tenants fall behind on their rent. And we, in this budget, from the leadership, not just on the Assembly side, but Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Harkin, is we're going to have $3 billion, I hope, to give out rent money for tenants who are falling behind on rent arrears. I think we have a really robust program in place, and that's going to help, millions of New Yorkers across the state. We need to do that. The reality is that rent program won't be in effect by May 1st. Even if we passed it in the context of the budget, and I know I and our senator and assembly colleagues wanted to do it early, but even we passed it in the context of the budget, and then we had an agency oversee it, there's no way those rent payments are going to get out by May 1st. So we have to be realistic about how soon that money can get out the door. The other thing is we put $1 billion aside for small businesses. And a lot of that money is going to be for rent relief. A lot of it is going to be supporting our small businesses. We need to, we've gotten $12 billion from the federal government to do these important things, and that's really going to help the market. If we open up too early and open up in a big way, what we've seen across the country and across the world is opening up too early could result in another, outbreak. And if we open up too early and we have another outbreak, we are going to fall farther behind. We've seen countries who did a really good job early on across, in Asia specifically, where they locked down quickly, and now they're reopening and doing really well. We needed to lock down, we needed to do it quickly, and unfortunately, we have not done a good job, and this problem continues. We can solve the housing crisis with money. Money really will solve it. We can get people from the homeless shelters in permanent housing, which is in the HVAP program. We can do, Senator Harkin and I are trying to do a ADU bill to try to help homeowners with the additional rental income opportunity. There are a lot of things New York State could do right now to advance housing, but it isn't just reopening. That's not the answer. The answer is using government resources to solve the problem that we created because of the pandemic, and help businesses and help homeowners and help renters out in this crisis.
Now, before we take this conversation upstate for a second, I do want to clarify, I misspoke earlier. I think I said rent moratorium. Of course, I meant the eviction moratorium. So many terms, sometimes I misspeak, but I want to bring our upstate legislators into this, because we hear so much about New York City, and obviously it's the population center of the state, and where most of the good part of the economic activity is. But Buffalo, Rochester, and other cities across the state have also seen a lot of economic side effects from the pandemic. Assemblymember Rivera, maybe you could jump in here. What is similar and what is different about the experience in your district compared to your downstate colleagues?
What I'm coming to find after my very lengthy 2 months in office now is that one difference that's glaring when it comes to housing is that here in Buffalo and sort of the first ring suburbs around it is that home ownership is still relatively affordable. I mean, obviously prices have gone up. The market is in such a way that houses are going for more than they would have because there's just fewer things out there. But in reality, I mean, when you compare what it costs to buy a home here versus in parts of downstate, it's still obtainable here. So what we're finding is, I guess, sort of twofold. One, our housing stock is old. I live in a house that was built in 1903, and that's not uncommon. I mean, we live in old houses here. So with old houses means lead. With old houses means materials that are outdated, and houses that are outdated, and that comes with an expense. But the other thing is that we here it's not uncommon for individuals to own more than one home, and it doesn't mean that they're super wealthy, but it's not uncommon to own a home and acquire another home for family or things like that. So we have some issues around landlords being able to just continue the upkeep of their expensive to maintain homes, not expensive because they're luxurious, but expensive because they're so old. So here the most calls I'm getting in my office about housing is really from homeowners that maybe they themselves have lost income because of COVID, or we're on a fixed income already and they're having tough times. And it means either that they're not able to pay their mortgage, or they're not able to keep up with the house that is, truthfully falling down on them. So, a new roof is expensive, even if you can buy a house that's relatively affordable, and a new boiler and a new whatever is expensive. So, I think that here, what I'd like to see us do is focus on, homeowner relief, that people that have been in these homes for many, many years and been parts of the community for many, many years, and certainly aren't, wealthy, by terms that we would see in other parts of the state. These are often seniors, often retirees that own their homes and, know that they're coming against difficult times, and they're not exactly sure what they can do, what's available to them, how they can, keep their homes. And as much as they can push back mortgage payments, and their banks many times will allow them, they know that that's just going to come back around on the back end. Meanwhile, their homes are falling into disrepair. So that's sort of a big thing that I'm hearing on my end.
And Zach, I would just like to add that, we started focusing on renters, but homeowners are a very big part of this equation. And, in New York City, a majority of households are renters, but it is more evenly split throughout the state. And obviously in lots of the state, homeownership is the primary way people live. And just a couple of points. First of all, we have been concerned about that since the beginning. We did pass the strongest mortgage forbearance bill in the country. Unfortunately, as New York State, we can only regulate banks that are chartered in New York State and mortgage servicers that are chartered in New York State. But what it does is it says a lot of these forbearance program, as my colleague from the Assembly said, you get a temporary break on making the payments, but then they're going to come due at the end of the forbearance, which might be, now, or it might be 6 months from now. What we did is we passed a bill that says that you as a homeowner have a right to have your payments delayed until the end of the mortgage rather than the end of the forbearance. And that means, if you have a mortgage right now that lasts until 2030, you don't have to make those missed payments now until 2030. You also could, at your choice, spread them out evenly over the course of the mortgage. But that kind of aggressive step is something we were able to do for mortgages that are held by New York banks. We have urged the federal government to follow suit. There is a mortgage forbearance program at the federal level that has now just recently been extended by the Biden administration to 18 months. But the other thing is that the eviction moratorium is also a foreclosure moratorium. It's a moratorium on tax foreclosure as well as mortgage foreclosure. So short-term, homeowners should not be in jeopardy of losing their homes either from taxing authorities or from banks. And we are looking for ways to address the costs of homeownership. Both the Assembly and the Senate have put some significant amounts of money in for that purpose of state funds. And there is federal money in the most recent bill that's come out of Washington that is likely to come in significant amounts to the state. It's probably not enough to cover all of the homeowner costs out there, but we are really focused on that. One more thing, it's been a big fight in recent years to fund something called the Homeowner Protection Program. This is a program that basically gives everybody, if you are facing foreclosure or having, housing stability issues, if you're a homeowner, it gives you a right to counseling, perhaps legal representation as well, to try to address that. It's a $20 million program. It was zeroed out by the governor in last year's budget, and we restored it just before COVID, before we sort of shut down a lot of activities around COVID. And we're now, both the Assembly and the Senate have fully funded that again this year. So we really are trying to address homeowner issues just as we address renter issues. And of course, to some of Member Fitzpatrick's point, a lot of homeowners are people who also have a tenant or two and paying all of the rent. Our goal is to pay all rent arrears for anybody who struggled during COVID, and that should help homeowners and building owners and small landlords as well as tenants.
Yeah, Zach, if I can just quickly jump in, and thank you, Senator Kavanaugh, for talking about the Homeowner Protection Program. That's something that we've been supporting for many years and keep having to come back to the table to make sure we get that funding. One of AARP's really overarching priorities is to allow people to age the way that they want to. And we know overwhelmingly that's in their homes and communities. So all of these things that we're discussing, these eviction moratoriums, the mortgage forbearance, help for people to, if they find themselves in eviction or foreclosure, be able to go to the justice system with the counsel that they need. Finding all these different programs for funding, the Housing Access Voucher Program that I know Senator Kavanaugh has been championing. But while we're talking about budget priorities to meet our constituency, I would really kick myself if I didn't mention one of the most important things to keeping older people at home is to give them services and supports where they are and keep them out of long-term care institutions. So I just thank you to the Senate. They gave us $27 million in their one house to the State Office for the Aging for these programs. Really hope that the Assembly can meet us there and put that in the final budget. But I know we have such a committed group here who really understand these issues. So thank you all for all your hard work on this.
Zach, if I can just chime in a couple points. I think my colleagues covered a lot of it, in the lower Hudson Valley, rental arrears, foreclosure issues, the affordability issues. One of the things that we've done to address high property taxes and seniors on fixed income is we put in a circuit breaker for the first time to about $450 million. It's not enough, but it's a beginning. It's a stake in the ground of, I think, something that's long overdue. We've got some of the highest property taxes in the country, and we need to look at how we address that. And part of that is on the education side, is increased state education funding, take the burden off of local property taxpayers. But one of the things that is not going away after the pandemic are kind of the bad fundamentals. In the lower Hudson Valley, you have very high land costs. We mentioned the high taxes. You have a shortage of affordable units to begin with. Westchester County just did a study. 82,000 units is the need, with a need to build 12,000 new units. The lack of infrastructure. We are the east of Hudson watershed, the drinking source for 1 million New Yorkers, and lack of infrastructure. Much of it is on septic, so it's really hard to get the approvals. NIMBY is still a big issue when it comes to affordable housing. Local municipalities putting up blockades, dragging their feet, dragging the process out for years, driving up costs. So a lot of those fundamentals have not changed. And those are the kind of things that we're going to have to work on long term if we're really going to improve affordability and expand housing options in the lower Hudson Valley.
So now I want to put out another question to everyone. Most of you, except for Kristen, but this also applies to you, are elected officials. How many of you have had somebody call and say, I heard about XYZ state program, but I can't figure out how to apply. Has that ever happened to anybody on a rental assistance program maybe, or something else? We've seen that implementation and the vaccine distribution process, for instance, is so important in bridging between the plan and actually helping people. So what are the implementation issues we've seen out there? I remember Senator Kavanaugh, when you were passing your bill in December, we were talking about language access, making sure the forms were in in Chinese and Spanish and so on. So I'm throwing it out there. What are the implementation issues out there you've seen, and how can we do better?
Yeah, if I may just begin, we, as you know, we had a previous rental assistance program. It was a very limited program. It was about $100 million. This program is about 30 times as large as that. So we really do recognize that you need a full-fledged outreach plan. If there are really 1 million households out there roughly who are experiencing difficulty paying their rent, the challenge, as much as it's been a challenge to kind of design a program and get the funding, is going to be getting the word out, getting people to be able to apply, and then processing those applications in an efficient way. So our bill that we've been talking about requires access in people's language. It allows landlords and tenants to apply jointly, basically, so that when in the prior program, if the tenant applied, one of the things the state had to do is then go find the landlord and figure out how to make the payment. We are encouraging people to apply jointly with landlords so that they can, so that the landlord's information, the tenant information can be all together and can be processed more efficiently. We're also proposing to permit nonprofit organizations to submit applications on behalf of tenants. We are proposing that the program it be possible to apply for this program by telephone, not just on the internet or by mail as the previous program worked. And we're insisting that there be really robust outreach across the state, that both the state and localities have plans for engaging with organizations that know their communities, that know how to get in touch with people and get them into this program. We're also designing the application process such that it won't be so onerous, that people can self-attest to certain elements of the application as necessary, so that they can get the application complete quickly, that the state can review certain documentation and then can proceed to make payments as quickly as possible. And that will help, obviously, tenants who are struggling and experiencing great anxiety over unpaid rent, but also landlords who need this money to make to maintain their buildings and pay their property taxes and their mortgages.
I would say here in Rochester, we were intentional as far as the city and the county working together, looking at different employees who could assist as navigators in assisting people with, the different programs that were out there. We actually had librarians throughout the city and the county that assisted with these efforts. So they became navigators. And for all of us as senators and assembly persons, we also have, navigators in our offices. So, if people are having a real struggle as far as navigating the system, they can call any of our office during our office hours, and we'll have people that's there that will assist them and point them in the right direction as well.
Kristen, I imagine you've dealt with some folks that might have technology issues, maybe broadband or something else. How has that affected people's ability to stay in their homes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been working this budget trying to increase access to affordable internet and broadband access. But I think this issue that we're seeing, isn't just related to COVID. We hear from people all the time about programs like SCREE, right? Or even other, benefit and safety net programs like SNAP. And we really need to do all that we can to make it as easy as possible for people to access these programs, for people to re-enroll in these programs, and have robust education and outreach, and help to get older individuals access to all of these really life-saving benefits that help keep them healthy and safe at home.
Good. I mean, the issue for older.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Harvey.
I mean, the issue for older New Yorkers applies across the board. Like, we get calls from people who don't know how to use computers, so they can't get a vaccination appointment. We hear people who don't understand how to apply for rent relief. This is an ongoing problem. There's language capacity issues, but there's technology barriers that continue. So I think we had an agency problem before. We went to HCR, the housing agency, to do the rent relief. They didn't do a good job there, and it was clear that they weren't the appropriate agency, and the program that we crafted was not a good program with a goal. I hope through the budget context and through the Senate and Assembly leadership, we create a program through a better agency, through a better system, using the OTDA system already in place, where people who need financial help can get it. And then we have an application process that we can process pretty quickly. So the HCR waited 4 months to look at this 92,000 applications, only approved 15,000 of them. It was a really laborious, onerous process, and I think we need to go to agencies that know how to do this better. And then we also need to use what Damon said, Someone Meek said, which was we need structural support. Our nonprofit, our libraries, our schools, our systems, and like really energize them and engage them in this process, because we're going to need everyone on board to make it happen.
And Zach, to Harvey's point, we are proposing that this program go through the office, the OTDA, which is the agency that it's the state agency. It has a branch basically in each county, and it is an agency that has experience cutting really large volumes of checks to large volumes of people. One challenge, though, is that many people who are eligible for these rent relief programs are not people who have previously been in touch with that agency. There are a lot of people that, were comfortably middle class at the beginning of the pandemic, and they lost their livelihoods, and they're now struggling with their rent. So there is going to be a tremendous effort necessary to connect people with this program. But we had good success after some very initial difficult times with the unemployment assistance program, which all of our offices were inundated with people who couldn't get access to that. Most of our offices were kind of converted into branch offices of the Department of Labor, but we managed to get many thousands of people those benefits, and that really was a lifeline for a lot of people.
So we're about halfway through. So we've talked a lot about the pandemic and the state budget and what we can do short term. But obviously, affordable housing in a state like New York has been just kind of a sitting time bomb for a long time, and not just in New York City, but in the suburbs, in places like Rochester and Albany, where I live now. It's expensive. So, who wants to kind of start us off? Actually, I'm going to go to Long Island, to Assemblymember Fitzpatrick on this. When I think of like where affordable housing is really a brewing issue, it sure seems like Long Island is one of those places, because the city can only hold so many millions of people, and people are going further and further out. They want to have a nice place to live. What do you see as kind of the starting point for addressing the long-term affordable housing needs in a place like Long Island?
There are some very interesting things that are occurring right now, and some issues that I believe are long overdue to be addressed that can bend that cost curve downward. A very popular concept now in Long Island is transit-oriented development. We have the Long Island Railroad. So we have some very big projects going on with East Side Access, allowing people to go not just to Penn Station, but to go to the east side of Manhattan. That is fairly close to completion. You also have the third rail, which would allow reverse commutation for city residents to come out to jobs on Long Island. But what is happening now is many communities, including my own, are looking to create overlay districts in their municipalities. We have a very big project underway in the town of Smithtown. We happen to have in my district the second largest industrial park, second only to Silicon Valley. And it was filled many years ago with subcontractors for Grumman Aerospace, Fairchild Republic. We lost the aerospace industry years ago, and those industrial parcels were turning into office space. Nonprofits would come in and get very cheap real estate. So what's happening now is the Hauppauge Industrial Association, which is now known as the Long Island Innovation Park, undertook a very extensive study to determine where it needs to be today and 10, 20 or more years from now. And in order to attract companies in the life sciences area, because we have a very strong nest of life science, Stony Brook University, Brookhaven National Lab, Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. These companies have told the HIA, with the Long Island Innovation Park that, young people, millennials and others, but even older folks want walkable communities. And, since young people today, it's kind of interesting. If you lived in the suburbs, the minute you turned 16, you went down to DMV to get your learner's permit because you wanted to drive. Young people today are not driving as much as they used to, and they're not eager to get a license or to get their own automobile. They Uber everywhere. So we are now in the town of Smithtown conducting, or the study has been done, we are now going to put an overlay district to allow higher density housing. And that's always been a controversial topic on Long Island, is density. But when you live on an island, you can't grow north, east, west, or south. You have to grow up. And you pick your areas. And what we have done is in the industrial park, but also by our 3 railroad stations on the Port Jefferson branch, is allow for that higher density. So this is, it's becoming popular. And it's interesting that, this is sponsored by AARP, and our town supervisor once addressed a group from the League of Women Voters who are all older women. And he spoke to them about the plans that he had for the town in increasing density in these specific areas. And there were about 25 or so older women in the audience, and he said all but one were in favor of this. And the key reason was these seniors have lost their families. Their children and grandchildren are moving away and moving off Long Island because of the high taxes, because of the cost of living, and they feel very lonely. So we're seeing a real change in attitude toward increasing density, not everywhere, but where it's feasible. And that is either in the industrial park to create a walkable community there or around your train station. And the model that we use on Long Island for the future is the Village of Patchogue, which has done a wonderful job of increasing density and making it work. And it's become a very hot spot for people of all ages to go for a bite to eat, a new place to live. If you want to give up your single family home and live in a more urban type environment where you can walk here, there, and everywhere, it's becoming more popular on Long Island. But on the long-term issue, Zach, and this is an issue that is, I believe, totally ignored. Senator Harckham talked about getting back to the fundamentals. Well, one of the fundamentals that we ignore are, the high tax burden. What drives up taxes? Taxes matter. People and capital will go to where they're most wanted and best treated. And tax policy is important. And we have, the typical Long Island tax bill is about 70 to 75% school taxes. And when you look at the high cost when you look at the provisions of some of the labor contracts in some of these school districts, it is a driving force toward the, of the increase in the property tax and the cost to live on Long Island. And so when you look at these public employee contracts, they are a significant driver in the suburbs of these high costs. And what we have to do, in my opinion, you've got to transition, for example, at the very least for new hires, is get away from the traditional defined benefit pension platform and go to a defined contribution to lower the cost. 70% of the instructional staff at your state university, SUNY, use the defined contribution option, which is a lower cost option, more flexible and portable. I believe in the next 5 years or so, that issue is going to come front and center. Because as I said before, we have not yet felt the full effect of this pandemic from an economic and government standpoint. And when the dust settles and we find out that the tax certiorari applications are going through the roof because these office buildings are 15 to 20% full, and the revenue is not there to support the tax assessment, this is going to change how government operates. So necessity is the mother of invention. So you're going to see different housing options and the creativity, and AARP has come out with some options that they'd like to see pursued. I fully support all of these to create opportunities for seniors and all people. I mean, even the LGBTQ community has some exciting housing programs that they're and developments that they're developing here on Long Island for that community. I saw someone on the chat raising that issue. So there are some exciting things happening, but if we don't deal with the structural cost drivers that are driving the tax burden, we're just chasing our tails, and you're going to continue to see the costs increase, and we're running out of money. I mean, how much more debt can we put on the federal taxpayer, to bail, this out? It can't go on forever, and it won't.
So we dropped the M word, the millennial. I'm guilty of that, and I think there's at least one other millennial, maybe two or three on this call. But if I'm to put on not just my millennial hat, but my real estate hat, I'd say there's some cities upstate with good bones, right? Buffalo, Rochester, beautiful buildings. Ones had very big populations that were much larger. And right here, we have a real life millennial lawmaker, Assemblymember Rivera. If I'm not mistaken, you're a millennial. Tell me a little bit about what you see is needed. A lot more people could live in Buffalo, that's for sure. It used to be one of the biggest cities in the country. How can we get cheaper living out there for people?
It's interesting. So, Buffalo is a city of about 220,000 people, and in its height, it was hundreds of thousands more. And truthfully, it wasn't that long ago. It was, wasn't in the 1800s. It was still like in the 1940s and 50s. But what we saw was just people, just extended and went out to the suburbs. So, like a lot of other upstate cities and Rust Belt cities, we saw a lot of people leave Buffalo and move to the suburbs. Ironically, they left the city. Still living within Erie County, which is like a 920,000-ish person county, so it's a big county. They did so to go into municipalities where they would pay higher taxes. People moved out of the city of Buffalo to move into first-ring suburbs, not because the amenities were nicer or because the housing was nicer, simply because, and not because it was cheaper, because like I said, taxes were higher. It's because they truly believed that the school systems were better. And I think, we have sort of a gap in that, maybe folks my age aren't having as many kids as they used to. So maybe that's part of the draw. But people that are looking to settle here with families still aren't moving into the city as much as they would, because there's this sense that the school systems are just better in the suburbs. I'm a product of the Buffalo public school system, so I don't subscribe to that. But that's a big driver. Because taxes are relatively low, property taxes, that is, in Erie County and in the city of Buffalo. Like my colleague said, the majority of taxes sometimes that people are paying are school taxes, and they see that whether you're in Suffolk County or whether you're in Amherst, New York, or anywhere else. So I'd say there's that. There's that, but then I'd also say the people that are moving in, I'm finding, into the city. Tend not to be millennials. They tend to be older folks that are leaving the suburbs. They're empty nesters, and they're coming into the city because, granted, this was pre-COVID, and they were coming into the city because it afforded them a life and an environment that they didn't have in the suburbs all these years. You have people that build up a lot of equity in their homes, and they sell them because maybe they don't need a big home anymore, and they come into the city because this is where the theaters are, and this is where the arena is, and this is where the restaurants are, and you get closer to Canada from here. So it's an interesting predicament that we have young people moving into the suburbs, older people starting sort of a second life in the city, and then the only other sort of grouping of people that are coming into the city and filling our vacant homes, because there's a lot of vacant homes here, are actually refugees. Buffalo's become a big refugee resettlement city. So we have one of the biggest Burmese populations in the country here in Buffalo, which 10, 15 years ago, people that live on the street that I'm on right now probably couldn't have pointed to Burma on a map, and here we are, and which is great because it means that our neighborhoods are filling up. It means that our houses are filling up. It means that houses are on the tax rolls. It means that communities are becoming more diverse, and where there's more diversity, there's more momentum, and where there's more momentum, you'll find success. And as I guess I'll end with this. The trajectory where this is going right now, at least in this neighborhood where I am, is that people are going to start getting priced out of the market. And that's sort of the concern of the long term. Like you said, we spend a lot of our time as legislators talking about the issue of the day. But, one thing that's constantly on my mind about the next few years is that the seniors that live down the street that maybe bought their home for $20,000 not that long ago are now being approached to sell their homes for 120, 140, 150, and it seems like big money. But when they sell, because perhaps they're in their own sort of financial situation, they can't afford to move into another house because now houses are costing 200, 220, 230. So we're having elderly folks and folks that have just simply been in the neighborhood a long time getting priced out, which is just, something we all have to kind of think about now, how we're going to put in our shoulder on what gentrification does to communities.
So we're running out of time. I'm so sorry, Kristen, we're running out of time, but everyone will have one last chance to speak, I promise. But I did want to just put it out there, and maybe I'll put this to Kristen actually, and maybe Harvey or Assemblymember Epstein might jump in, is, we talk about affordable housing, and then there's affordable housing. Obviously people that are middle class, maybe even people that are better off than middle class, have taken some hits during the pandemic, but it's the truly impoverished who are obviously the most vulnerable, right? And oftentimes when we talk about affordable housing, sometimes you need to still make 30, 40, 50 or more $1,000 a year to qualify. How can we get housing assistance to those people who are like below 40% of the area median income, if I am getting my AMI acronym correct? What are your thoughts, Kristen?
Well, I think that, the legislature has done a lot of work already towards getting this rent relief and different programs that are out there. And while it's not specifically a program with rent relief, I really just want to take a moment and stress the importance of accessory dwelling units and the great work that Assemblymember Epstein and Senator Harckham have done with their really comprehensive bill here, because this is a proposal that can help alleviate so many of the issues that we talk about when we talk about affordable housing. It can help homeowners get some extra income, offload their property tax burden. It helps older adults be able to stay independent in these, homes and close to their family members and their community. It really helps to alleviate segregating our communities by providing more of this really affordable housing stock. And just, while we're talking about all of these issues, if it's not enough of a motivation to be able to keep older people in their homes and communities because that's where they want to be, just the economic impact of older adults contribute nearly 43% of the overall state GDP. In 2018, they contributed $72 billion in state and local taxes. So finding ways like these accessory dwelling units where we can keep people in the community, continue to contribute to the community is so important. And I'll also mention that Assemblymember Santa Barbara has this great proposal where he'll allow loans for people who want to build these accessory dwelling units to older adults. So I really just want to highlight that this is just a really simple and comprehensive step that we can take to make radical changes to the availability of affordable housing.
And since I want to make sure everyone has a chance to leave some last thoughts, let's go to Assemblymember Epstein. I can't think of anybody who really represents a district where housing is crazier than in your area of Manhattan. Lots of people, I'm sure, have bought their houses really cheap decades ago, now are struggling to stay in. There's a huge influx, tall buildings. All in all, please just take a minute. We're running out of time, but tell, how can we make housing more affordable? What's one concrete way that comes to mind?
Well, I think I would give you 5 if I can do it, okay? Because I think Kristen set up Pete's my ADU bill. I think there's a really good, that's an important path. I know Senator Harckham and I are going to keep pushing on this. The idea that my mom, who owns a house, on Long Island, honestly, and that she's, I was raised there, she's there alone, has a second story in the house that's been empty for 30, 40 years, could create, company for her, a source of income, and another unit. These ADU laws across the state could really be impactful. We would be able to bring hundreds of thousands of affordable units on the market, bring company to seniors who are living in these homes, help people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's a really good way to do it. And with financing available that we should get, it'll help people do the conversions that we're talking about. The second is we need a real 5-year housing plan. We've been pushing the governor to have a 5-year housing plan and to have real money to put another $2.5, $3.5 billion aside for the next 5 years to really have resources. It would be helpful once we pass this ADU bill to have those monies available for homeowners, but it allows us to do other things like in my district and probably Senator Kavanaugh's district, we're going to see a lot of conversions from commercial to residential. How do we have resources to do that? How do we do that in a way that creates a deeply affordable housing at 30 or 50% of AMI? It requires the state to step up with a real serious commitment because the buildings are there. We just need to make sure that the residential housing is going along with it. And that requires a ADU 5-year commitment. Third is this issue of land trust. So I'll be quick around land trust. It is a way to buy land. We've been talking about it. We're talking about it in mobile homes. We're talking about it across the state, like taking land, having government buy it, and then making sure long-term affordable housing is on the plan. I'm sorry, too long, but I think those are really good things that we could do right away. That doesn't cost a lot of money. That could get us hundreds of thousands of units quickly.
Fastest crash course in land use trusts I've ever heard. Senator Harcum, what is your takeaway for affordable housing today?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. You've heard about the ADUs. In my district, it's low-hanging fruit because many of them exist. Apartments above garages, above barns, cottages on properties, low-hanging fruit. Some of our municipalities have very good laws, and we're working with them to see how our law can work with their law, but many don't. And many put homeowners through great turmoil if they try to bring them online. And that's what we're trying to do with this law. The other thing, particularly up our way, we need is infrastructure. Many of our downtowns and our hamlets are lined with 2- and 3-story buildings. Years ago, those upper floors were apartments, but because of septic limitations and watershed limitations, those are now office spaces because of water use and the absence of infrastructure. So if we really want to bring affordable housing back to our downtown main streets, we really need to think about a strong and a cohesive infrastructure program in the watershed.
Interesting. Assemblymember Meeks.
All right, I want to follow up with Assemblymember Epstein. He touched on real money. So let's talk about real money. So one of the things that we introduced was the PIT, progressive income tax. And we can't forget about Ione. I don't think that we went far enough in the Senate or the Assembly in generating real new revenue for the state of New York. And when we talk about real new revenue, one of the challenges that we often hear from the counties and we often hear from homeowners as well is increased tax, property taxes. And that often stems from these unfunded mandates that often come by way of the state. So with that being said, we need to be intentional about generating new revenue and push back against these unfunded mandates and make sure the resources are there. And we have to recognize that our seniors are on fixed incomes. So the more you increase the property tax, the more of a struggle it becomes for those communities. So let's be intentional about raising real revenue and affect the needed change in the state. Thank you.
Assemblymember Rivera.
I guess the only thing I'd add that's different from what everybody is saying, because everybody is making really good points, is one thing I'm finding, and again, still sort of learning it all, is I feel as though there are programs, there are plans in place, there's money, let it be from HCR or other departments that touch these sort of subjects that are just not out there. They're just not getting to where people need to go. I mean, we talked about it early on in our time here in the Assembly, that the rent relief program and the amount of money that's still on the table, and we can have conversations around, well, it's restricted to this and you have to make below this and all that. But I just feel as though there's still money on the table in a lot of different ways that just isn't getting spent. It's not getting to people. It's not getting to where it needs to go. And this isn't me piling up on the governor or the administration, but there's a need to be quicker. There's a need to be more nimble. There's a need to be, frankly, more creative. And, there's occasionally projects that are great that happen in my neck of the woods. We just had a senior living, I want to say it's like a 46 unit affordable housing project done. HCR was helpful in it. And part of the units are going to go to homeless seniors, which is in need and important. But I just feel like those sort of things are few and far between. I just think that there's a constant, push, and that's, I feel, like one of the duties of an assembly member or senator is just to sort of keep their eyes on not just that money gets allocated, that the money's in the budget for X, but it's that X is getting spent and X is getting spent on what it should. So, I'm sure every legislature has had this fight with every governor, but I just think that this is an ongoing thing that we have to, perhaps now more than ever, be vigilant of with the increase in federal funding that we're receiving, and making sure that just money gets to where it has to go and it gets to the people that need it the most.
And we'll pivot here to Assemblymember Fitzpatrick, who we must recognize is especially brave today to be the lone Republican on a panel with, I think I'm counting 5 Democrats.
Well, I'm lucky to be among friends.
What are your parting thoughts?
Thank you, Zach. I just want to share with you a story. My perspective is more suburban than urban, but it affects the entire state. So I have a very dear friend up in Tonawanda, New York, not far from Mr. Rivera's district. And he and his wife are retired phys ed teachers. And they probably have a combined income in retirement of close to $250,000. And we spend a weekend in Florida, he and I and my brother and a couple of buddies. And we've had discussions about, what's happening in New York, et cetera. And he had a good line. He said, home values are not rising very quickly in Buffalo, in my area. And he said, we don't talk about, how well we're doing, when we gather with neighbors and things, because it's a sensitive subject, because, the public employees do very well in Buffalo. And he said a very interesting thing. He said, what's good for me and my family is really hurting my community because of the tax burden. So when we talk about low-hanging fruit, there are a lot of good ideas out there and a lot of good programs. And now with federal money and other money coming in, we're going to be able to, I think, meet some of these needs, and I think very effectively. But Zach, to make it sustainable for the long term, we have to look at some of these structural cost drivers. And I firmly believe that within a decade, after the dust settles from this pandemic and we see how many aspects of our lives are going to be different, our living patterns, our shopping patterns, our work patterns, and at the effect on the economy and state and local coffers, we're going to need to change some of these long-held practices. We're going to need pension reform. We're going to need to economize in government. We have, because of the generosity of these contracts and these benefits, we have more employees actually than we need. So I think these issues are going to come front and center within the next decade. And if we don't deal with those, we're going to be constantly challenged to keep housing affordable, because we just end up chasing our tails.
And Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you. And again, let me just take a minute to thank City and State and Zach and ARP and Kristen for this wonderful discussion, and all my colleagues. So we don't have a single housing problem or single housing market in New York, and we need to recognize that there are very, very distinct problems and then also some common elements. In places like New York metropolitan area, the issue really has been for a long time a lack of adequate supply. People struggle to find housing. The costs are driven up very rapidly by the fact that the supply and demand causes it to be more and more expensive. We need to. I'm going to agree with something my colleague Senator Fitzpatrick and I don't agree on certain things, but I want to agree that finding ways to encourage additional development in the suburbs of places like New York City is really important, particularly around transit. The accessory dwelling unit proposal, Senator Harkin and Senator Epstein are part of that. But the suburb of the New York City area produces less housing than we need. And the suburbs, the New York suburbs in particular, Westchester and Nassau and Suffolk, produce less housing than even the Jersey suburbs of New York because of more restrictiveness in New York. We need to find ways to increase housing production. We also need to look carefully at the tax proposals and what the tax incentives we provide and what they are incentivizing. One of the biggest expenditures in New York on affordable housing is the 421A program. It is a program that gives developers no taxes for very long periods, and it's supposed to produce affordable housing, but it produces very little affordable housing, mostly because the real estate industry got Republicans who ran the Senate the last time that bill was up for renewal to make it excessively generous relative to a very limited amount of affordability that we get out of that. That is up to
And I think we're going to have to leave it at there, Senator. Thank you so much. I do want to just keep our eye on the prize. Christian, maybe you can just speak to how seniors are among these vulnerable groups that we should really keep in mind. Super quick, maybe 10 seconds or so. What do we need to do on affordable housing moving forward?
We need to keep people in their homes. We need to give them services at home. I can't say it enough. 27 million for SOFA, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you all to our panelists, our wonderful, great sponsor, AARP New York. Let's keep the conversation going. I'm going to plug us really quick as fast as possible. Join us on Tuesday, March 23rd at 2 p.m. for our next installment and first 3 coronavirus updates on schools in the pandemic. Huge issue. Registration is free and can be found in the chat. And then, of course, we have another great event on ranked choice voting on March 25th at 2 p.m. also in the chat. Registration is free. And of course, Above and Beyond, honoring 40 outstanding women across all industries in New York, is on Wednesday, March 31st at 5 p.m. Registration is free and can be found on the City and State website at cityandstateny.com, and sign up for our great newsletter, including mine. Albany Insider comes out every day at 2 p.m. You can sign up, learn all about it at cityandstateny.com. Thank you so much, our great legislators, our wonderful audience. This has been wonderful. Catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.